Greetings. This is Griff Ruby with a review of another Asimov novel. Not one that gets commented on too much, but I think it is actually of some interest and value, as you probably seen from the title. The novel would be his book, Fantastic Voyage. So, now this was a very unusual story. He had pretty much bowed out of writing fiction. The occasional short story or something like that was about it. So he really wasn't doing much novel-wise. But what had happened was that this really started in Hollywood. They had this kind of a story they wanted to do and wanted to take a tour of inner space. Just something different and predictably quite a bit more colorful than going into outer space. So inner space inside, the inner space is inside a human being as distinct from the outside. So that was kind of a neat thing. There really hadn't been much of any attempt to do a trip like that, or film in particular a trip like that before. So you get to see all these extreme close-ups of all these microscopic views of what it would look like to be the size of a germ looking around inside various parts of the human body. It's almost like it ends up being like a grand tour. So, but the movie already existed. The story already existed. The script already existed. And finally, all of that had been put together as a screenplay for the movie that had been prepared by somebody by the name of Otto Clement. He was the one who was responsible for the story. But for whatever reason, I guess because of his scientific background, which, having written a lot of science fact from the late 50s up until the mid-1960s when this project was finally given to him, it just made sense to have someone who knew a lot of this stuff really well to write the novelization of the movie. And ordinarily, Asimov would not have been willing to do this because, the novelizations of movies are very temporary. They're just promotional things that come and go with the movie, and that's usually the end of it. But he said, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it for reals, and he did one thing that had apparently not been done before. Many movies had novelizations that would be published to come out roughly the time of the film in the movie theaters. And that was the plan here too. But they'd always come out in paperback. They'd always be very ephemeral, and then they would disappear, and that was the end of it. And Isaac Asimov was having none of that. He says, no, I want this thing. If I'm going to do this, I want a hardcover. And that never existed before. It took some negotiating and some figuring out, but Otto Clement, bless his soul, if you will, had taken the time and effort to find a publisher that would take it. It was Houghton Mifflin. Because Doubleday, see, the thing was, whoever published it really wasn't going to be working with the author very much. The author provides the text. That's it. But then Hollywood was going to do all the other negotiations, decide on the cover, and other such things, distribution, and all those other decisions and so forth would be controlled from Hollywood and not from the author or just merely the publisher. So Doubleday didn't want to be involved with that, but they said, but you go ahead. Now, originally it was going to be a paperback publisher, Bantam, who would publish the paperback, and I assume they did. I don't have a specimen of that. But in time, Otto had tracked down that Houghton Mifflin and was able to get them to be willing to do the hardcover, which they did. That's what this is. What's kind of unusual is that Houghton Mifflin did not do and does not do science fiction books. So this is a really unique book in yet another way. So the story already existed. The movie was being made. What could Isaac Asimov do except try to write the story and kind of massage it a little bit to put it in his format, as if he had written it? And how would this work out? Well, it actually worked out surprisingly well. when you read this book, if you didn't know all this background, you could almost believe it was a story that he had written. He really manages to put everything in his style while still retaining the whole story and even virtually all the lines and the details from the script. He has a little bit that he has to add owing to the scientific background. Well, two couple things. One is in the movie they could just show this picture and there'd be this brightly colored scene of inside, say an artery or something like that, and you kind of look around and here's all these red blood corpuscles floating around, and there's the view. Somebody could say, look at those are red blood corpuscles. Oh wow, neat. That's all you need to do in the movie. In the book, you have to try to portray more of it because it's just cold typescript and the reader's imagination to go by. So it's a little harder, needs a little more detail in trying to present what these things would have looked like. Now, the other thing that he had to concern himself with was the fact that some of the science in the story was kind of sloppy. The story had, well, the biggest one is at the end, and this is the one where they're all done. They've got to get out of the body. They're going to go up the optic nerve and out in front of the eyeball, and from there it'd be easy to pick up. The only thing was they had this submarine with them. In the movie, the submarine gets swallowed up by a white blood corpuscle, smashed to bits, and that's the end. Problem solved. Huge continuity error as far as anyone should be concerned. I could see that and was a little disturbed at that. And Isaac Asimov just said, I'm going to have to do something about that. That's all there is to it. And he did. So he had to come up with some additional way that basically the submarine would also have to be pulled along somehow out with the people so that it too, when it expands, does not expand, well, obviously not as a whole intact sub, but neither as a whole bunch of shards and fragments and pieces inside the patient's brain. I mean, you got to get everybody and everything out of there. Something as simple as a small screw or a valve or something left behind, would expand back to full size inside him somewhere and be catastrophic, medically speaking. So he had to do that, and looking at how he did it, it was really surprisingly smooth and consistent. He handled that so well you wouldn't even know. One other smaller inconsistency I noted is in the book, they lost some air and they have to get some air. They happen, however, to be passing through the lungs anyway, how convenient, where they can just kind of pull in some of the air from inside the lung. And in the movie, they just pull in the air, and that's great. They're all taken care of. Now they've got air for the rest of the trip after all. In the book, there's the little problem with the fact that everyone in this thing is breathing micro-miniaturized air molecules. And then suddenly they're going to mix that with non-miniaturized molecules that are so large that apparently in comparison to themselves, you could almost see them directly. So you can't breathe that if you're micro-miniaturized. Well, the whole idea of micro-miniaturized was kind of a weird one, but you just kind of had to put that one on the back. I mean, it's like faster than light travel, hyperspace, or so many other time travel and all these other things. So micro-miniaturization is in the same category. You kind of have to allow that one specific set aside of what is obviously, so far as everyone knows, scientifically impossible. Just pretend that somehow magically that one detail has been taken care of, and then you just go on from there and still try to work that as consistently as possible, and in all other aspects still keep the science as proper, realistic, and consistent as you can. So that's what he's done, and it's a pretty interesting story. It even has the same kind of title names that Asimov might use in one of his novels. A plane, the guy's coming in, a car, he's getting a ride somewhere, gets crashed and injured, and that's basically shot at, and that's where he gets a plot in his brain. In headquarters, they take him into this special secret place where they're going to take care of him. In briefing, they've decided what they're going to do, and they got to get everybody going on what and how what their roles are. And the whole scheme, they're going to put them in the submarine, they're going to shrink it down because they've got this technology, They're going to inject that into his bloodstream. He's going to find his way up to the brain clot, and they'll take care of it from the inside, and then they just get out, and that would be the operation. So then we get introduced to the submarine, miniaturization, submergence, entry. Finally, we're 9 chapters in. The movie takes this long too. To really get to all that in there as well. We're finally in the artery somewhere, going up the jugular vein up on into the brain. Only there's some weird little fistula, they call it, that somehow causes everything to zip over from the artery straight to the vein, and now suddenly they're headed down into the heart. So now they're going astray. They got a whole hour, and if everything had worked as planned, they probably could have been in and out of there in 10 minutes. So they fortunately have a fair amount of time to spare that they can use to take care of these several emergencies. So they have to get through the heart, which means a man's heart has to be stopped from beating for a minute while they pass through it. Then they end up going to the lung, because when you go in from any part of any vein going to the heart from other parts of the body, it goes through part of the heart, and then the blood coming out of that side of the heart goes to the lungs. And then after the lungs, all nicely oxygenated, it now goes to the other side down to the heart, and from there back out to the whole rest of the body. So they're going to the lungs. They're in the lungs. They get their air when they had a little emergency there. And then they start using this lymphatic system, capillary lung, pleura, an interesting little detail about the lung and the outside layers, and a little layer of moisture in between. And then finally the lymphatic system proper. And then for some reason they decided it's kind of economical to go up to the inner ear. And that, of course, is when everyone's trying to be quiet and a pair of scissors gets dropped. That's in the movie, that's in the story. And it shakes everybody around, but they carry on. And then finally they get up to the brain. They're down to the last few minutes left, but they can get down to the clot, take care of the clot. And oh, by the way, somebody on board the submarine turns out to be a spy and tries to sabotage things. They could have done, there's a lot of things that went wrong. Many of them, all of them, some of them, who knows, could have been sabotaged by that person, or some may have been accidents. It's never made clear, neither in the book nor in the movie. And then finally they've got to get out, and they can't go back down the jugular vein, jugular artery, jugular vein, and get pulled out that way. They got to go straight down the optic nerve and come out the eye. And by the time they're swimming out of the eye, they've already started to deminiaturize. So there's your story in a nutshell. One other small thing I have that's kind of fun to show is that this is another one of the very few stories of his that got serialized in a publication. Now, Isaac had wanted it to be published in fantasy and science fiction. They agreed to take it. But Hollywood was in charge of this, and they said, no, they can't have it. But Otto Clement had worked behind the scenes and finally got it so that, of all people, the Saturday Evening Post would be the ones to publish the story in a 2-part serial. So that's what they did. And let's see, that's really kind of fun about this is they actually have some stills from the movie. So that's kind of a cool thing. So, big magazine. Asimov had always wanted to get himself into what they called the slicks, which is to say these big magazines like Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and the like. And his attempts to get there had one and all failed. And they are somewhere, I guess, inside the brain. Here's the patient laid out on the operating table, ready for the submarine to go in. Let's see here. Okay, a view from the accident, after the accident of the car, they're getting the guy along. Dr. Michael's here. He's supposed to be the blood circulation expert, so he can best figure out which path to take through all the blood vessels to get from the vein up into the brain, jugular vein, not jugular artery, let me get that straight. Inside the submarine, you can see there, from left to right, Cora, the very skilled nurse worker, and then Dr. Duval, the brilliant genius medical person who actually does the surgery at the clot. He's very important in that way. Next is Michael, the blood path, blood circulation expert. And finally, our hero, Grant, who's just kind of the general overall expert who will kind of be in charge and kind of make sure everything stays on track. And oh, by the way, in case you haven't noticed, that happens to be Raquel Welch as Cora, who's a very famous actress, and all of back in the 60s. So, taking place. I think that's all the pictures. Yeah. Anyway, they put that in 2 parts, which incidentally, this was the last issue that was 25 cents. Because the next issue had part 2. It's priced at 35 cents. So that's kind of cool. And meanwhile, they have part 2 of the story. And again, there's some more glimpses of some of the cool stuff from the stills from the movie, I think, that already existed. That's supposed to be inside the lung. Those rock-like things are probably he smoked, and those are bits of nicotine. This is the submarine covered with a whole bunch of antibodies. That becomes a problem while they're in the inner ear. Everybody kind of keeping track of the surgery. You can kind of see the surgeons in the lower right corner working down below, and the other people kind of in charge. And then there's another shot. This is from inside the lung, also where they're first trying to poke a hole through so they pull the air in from the other side. Wow. And a shot from inside the brain, where Dr. Duval and Cora are about to do their doctor and nurse the surgery on taking care of the brain clot. So, anyway, what's kind of cool is that these things came out in February 26 and March 12 dated. The actual release may not necessarily coincided exactly with the date of the magazine, but obviously very early 1966. While the book and the movie came out in September 66, so it was kind of like a preview of all this. Now, one other interesting thing I noted in the Saturday Evening Post, Asimov was told it was abridged, and so it is. But I have to admit, but he refused to read it. Usually when something like that would be done, he'd want to see what they did. In this case, he's like, I've heard they abridged it, I don't want to read it, it'll probably put me in a terrible mood, so he never did. But I have to admit, as abridgments go, he really had, I think, rather little to fear here. They did a fairly clean job of it. So, anyway, he did what he could with Fantastic Voyage, but time would come when he would be invited or encouraged or whatever to do another Fantastic Voyage, a sequel, as it were. And that could be another review for another day, but at this point, that's what we have for Fantastic Voyage. Very unusual genesis, very unusual basis, all different places. Oh, by the way, when it got to the slicks, it turned out that Saturday Evening Post paid 6 times as much as fantasy and science fiction were paid. So even though Otto Clement took half of that, and let Asimov have the other half, I don't know that. I think that's the only royalties he got for this beyond a flat fee for writing the book. That actually had been a very generous thing, and as far as Asimov was concerned, Otto earned his, half of the bigger royalty there. So anyway, that's Fantastic Voyage, and it's a fun read. There's a lot of description of inside that you kind of picture. It helps to have seen the movie no matter what, though. There's a lot more action adventure, not as much stress on the usual permutations and things that he specializes in. But it reads smoothly, and like I say, it reads almost exactly as if he'd just written it all up himself. And I think that does a really good job there. Anyway, that's what I have for that.